Today at World Talks, we'll be joined by Francois Burgat to discuss if the Arab Spring has been a success and the discourse around the so-called political Islam. Much has happened in the Arab world during the last decade or so. When you look at the Arab Spring, you look back, would you regard it as a failure?
No, definitely not. I would say that the main characteristic of history is that it is long. So what has ended, what might be considered as a failure, is a stage, is one step in a process of history which will definitely be longer than the 5, 6 or 7 years we are looking at. I think that this part of the world is in a very ambitious process, moving away from the night of the colonial direct occupation through the turmoil of the nationalist reaction, where the power in this part of the world was using some of the means used by the colonizer in terms of brutality, in terms of lack of inclusion. And now we are in the process where the societies in this part of the world are reconnecting with their political institutions. They are recreating the political institutions which will allow them to live peacefully and to include every component of the diversity of each of them. The Arab Spring has produced two types of procedures: moving to the extreme, the Islamic State being crashed under the Western bombs, or Tunisian-like concessions through the center of the society, admitting. So we have a wide, from Mosul, I sometimes say, from Mosul to Tunis, or from Rashid al-Ghannouchi to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. So we have a wide spectrum of moving beyond this phase of history. What is important to understand that the situation in Syria is not the result of a balance of forces inside the Syrian society. I don't know if you know this little anecdote of history, but in 2005, Bachar al-Assad was being harassed by the Westerners due to the Hariri situation. They wanted to bring him off power. He went to Moscow, and I can tell you because the gentleman who was sitting next to him spoke. He said, Putin told him, "Believe me, as long as I shall be the president of Russia, you will be the president of Syria." So the situation now in Syria is not the result of the failure of those who wanted more democracy in Syria. It's the result of the balance of forces at an international level between the Russians and the Westerners. Knowing the fact that the Westerners started by giving some help to the revolutionary process, and then they changed their mind. This is never said very clearly. They started supporting the revolution in Libya. They started openly, militarily. They started saying they were with the revolution in Syria. And then what happened? They saw the ballot boxes in Tunis and the ballot boxes in Egypt. And they realized that this strand of political Islam would be the one winning any kind of open competition. They withdrew.
So when you talk about terms like political Islam or moderate or extremists and so forth, is it the case that the dominant ideology is defining those terms and the Muslims and Arabs are sort of merely in a position to just have to embrace that and go with it?
No, I don't think so. I'm not that pessimistic. I mean that the dominant terminology in the West, of course, well, yesterday I mentioned a little point. I know that the dark picture of political Islam is the result of a lot of miscoverage by the Western media. But we need to add that the dark side of political Islam is also a result of the strategy of communication of ruling elites in this part of the world. When I open the Egyptian discourse or the Syrian discourse, or I hear the same story that I hear from the worst part of the rightist, extremist fringe of my own society. So this criminalizing of the other, not for what he does, but for what he is a mean to maintain oppression. And we have to deconstruct it intellectually to know that, of course, political Islam or Islam, Islamist or Islam has become the bad word to discredit your enemy. And this we must not allow.